Kia ora, everyone. My name is Vince Minjares, Basketball Development Officer for Harbour Basketball. Really excited for tonight's session. This is the first in a series of coach development sessions that we'll be doing. Many thanks to Matt Lacey, who's come on board to help us really deliver some high quality sessions with some really interesting speakers. Our first session tonight is going to be with Aaron Young. So we'll be here for the next hour. Just getting into Aaron's mind a little bit, talking about his experience. Matt's going to introduce Aaron in a second. Just from my perspective, it's really cool to see, obviously Harbour coaches, but also seeing coaches from around the country here as part of this conversation. At Harbour, we really care a lot about development, certainly of players and coaches, and we're happy to facilitate these kinds of conversations to help grow basketball in New Zealand. So, I'm excited to have a part of this chat and see where the conversation takes us. Obviously, it's a topic that's really important to us at Harbour, but we know it's probably a very important one to many of you, hence why so many people have jumped on board. And of course, it's a chance to talk to one of the best coaches that we have in this country. So really excited to get that going. Matt's going to introduce Aaron, and he's going to walk through our process. So Matt, why don't you take it away?
Yeah, thanks, Vince. Hi, everybody. Thanks for jumping on this Tuesday evening. Just a couple of quick things. Normal Zoom protocol, if you could just make sure that you have muted yourself once we get underway. So how today's going to work, Aaron is going to start with just probably a relatively short presentation. And then we will get into some question and answer, which Vince will mainly facilitate. And I will be kind of on the chat and also bringing some questions to Aaron that we had through the registration process as well. So on that note, if you do have questions for Aaron, if you just want to use the chat function, chuck your questions in there. I'm happy to ask those. Also, if you want to ask the question as well, please just use the raise hand function, and then we will get to those a little bit later towards the end of the hour. So yeah, you can chuck those questions in the chat whenever you're ready. So yeah, like Vince, really excited to have Aaron here this evening to share with us kind of some of the learnings and insights from his career so far. I've coached with Aaron with the New Zealand under-17 team. I've coached against him at the high school level. And then also over the last 18 months, been working alongside him with the Auckland Huskies. So yeah, definitely know what he has to offer, and certainly some major strengths as a young coach. And I think we're all just really excited to learn from him tonight. A couple of things that I've really been impressed with, both as an opposition coach, but even working as a GM alongside him and following his journey through his first season in the NBL, is just his ability to build a culture and establish a group and a sense of direction for his teams. And he's had a ton of success doing that, both with St. Kitts as national champions, and then also obviously a third place finish with the Huskies this year. Also really interested in terms of how he layers his season and how he builds throughout a season. I know that he's had some challenges with that with the Huskies, probably some learnings too, but for all of us that work in the high school space, we know how long that season is. So just really keen to get his insights there too. So as it will get you underway, and thanks for jumping on board tonight.
Yeah, thanks, Matt and Vince. Really excited to be on here, and just want to say thanks for giving me the opportunity. This is kind of the first time I've been able to do something like this as a in the form of a coaching clinic, even though it's online. But just want to say appreciate everyone's time. I know a lot of us are locked up. Some of you might be in level 2, so you might have a little bit more freedom than us. But regardless, I just want to say appreciate you guys' time, and feel very grateful and fortunate to be in this position to present something based on my coaching experience so far. What I'll do now is I'll just share my screen and get into the presentation. And like Matt said, we can have a discussion once it's all finished, but yeah, let's get into it. So yeah, Matt was just kind of talking about, before, just some of the struggles and some of the adversity that we kind of faced this season or last season with the Huskies. And, I wanted to start with something like that, just basically kind of talk through basically some of the, from the small time I've been involved in coaching, which has felt like a long time. The one thing that I've taken away is the biggest amount of success has always come through adversity. I think back to, when I first started as a coach, not to say that it was adversity, but, I would definitely work extra hours and volunteer a lot of my time. And obviously, if that's something that you're passionate about doing, that's just what you do. And obviously that led to opportunities elsewhere. I remember starting off as a junior coach at the Breakers, doing refereeing and just being around. And that allowed me to get the video analysis role. And then through that allowed me ultimately to get the St. Kitts role. And then through the success that I had with St. Kitts, I think that was a big part of what I got Auckland Huskies. So, it's a step-by-step process. I call it brick by brick. That's kind of the mindset that I have, and just, taking every challenge on and kind of accepting and taking on that adversity from the start. So I wanted to share one of my favorite quotes or speeches from Denzel Washington. Hopefully the sound works. And we'll just start with this and just kind of hopefully sets the tone for the rest of the presentation.
Keep working, keep striving, never give up, fall down 7 times, get up 8. Without commitment, you'll never start. But more importantly, without consistency, you'll never finish. Ease is a greater threat to progress than hardship. Ease is a greater threat to progress than hardship. So keep moving, keep growing, keep learning. See you at work.
So yeah, that's that's one of my favorite quotes from Denzel. Ease is a greater threat to progress than hardship. I think that's for coaches, and I'm sure there's a lot of coaches in this chat that have been through different amount of experience and different levels of coaching. But nonetheless, it's not an easy position to be in. There's always, you're always doing more, you're always doing extra. But I will say, from the experiences that I've had, the more adversity that you go through and the more hardship you go through, the more success that you have in terms of building and growing as a person and as a coach. So I wanted to kind of use these examples that I had with these photos that you guys can see. The top left is us in New Caledonia last year. That was the first year of our cycle. Unfortunately, we didn't get to finish that cycle due to COVID, but I was also involved in another under 17 program as an assistant coach. And that's the bottom left corner. That was in China. And I just remember thinking back to that whole journey from start to finish, working with different coaches, working with different players, and the process that we went to. We went to the Philippines. Obviously, we went to China, as you can see. But the pinnacle event was the World Cup, which is what you can see in the big photo on the right. And, it just, when you get to there, when you get to that moment and you get to experience something like that, it just makes everything else worth it. You look back on your journey and just say, man, this is where this game took me. This is where this adversity, all the adversity that I went through took me. So, I think that's a really important thing to understand as a coach, that, there are going to be hard times, but, those are what make you, better and allow you to grow and take you to places that you'll probably never be able to go to if you weren't a coach. So just wanted to start with that. And then obviously, just talk about the word culture. It's definitely something that gets thrown around, especially in our sport and in the coaching realm. And, from the experience that I've had, and obviously Matt, you spoke on, establishing that culture, and I appreciate, the kind words with that. But, I think for me, probably the biggest thing that I've I identified that, creates culture is, your values, your core values. And I would split it up into two different categories. You have, for me, I think it's really important to have your core values as a coach, so as an individual. So I think if you guys don't have something along those lines, I think that's really important. So, for me, I mean, they could change over the years, but, for me, I think if you start your coaching journey with your core values, that's kind of what you stay true to, and that what allows you to, stay accountable to the work that you're going to put in going forward as you continue to progress and make, movements within your coaching career. And then obviously on top of that, you have your core values within your group, and, those work hand in hand in terms of progression and working to get better. But the two different examples that I wanted to give was the one that you can see here, which is keep it real. So that's not a typo. That's how we spell it at St. Kitts. So our school values are respect, excellence, integrity, and love. So we built that into what we do as a team. So keeping it real is, obviously a way of including those four values into what we do. And I always talk about it, if you hear me say, I'm gonna keep it real with you, you know what that means. And we always kind of tie it back to those values, our school values. So it works good with us because obviously it goes with what the school is, the alignment of the school and what they're trying to achieve as an organization, as an education. So that's really cool. And then with the Huskies, we had pack, which was a very powerful word within the group. Anyone that was involved or even were at the games or followed us on social media, you guys knew, we were all about, join the pack. And that obviously had its own importance within the group. And we had values that were aligned with PACK. So, I think that it obviously gives, when you can have a word that kind of ties in with it, it makes it a little bit more relatable, and we can kind of build on that. So I think having those core values as an individual, as a coach, but then also having them with your team and living by them, not just talking about it. I always talk about, I always kind of reflect on executing those values. It's one thing to talk about it at the start of the season and, you got a fresh start, you got a new team, but it's really important to really kind of drive home the execution of those values every day. And it allows a lot of the times those values will come naturally within the group, and it'll be kind of a group discussion. What do we want our values to represent? And once we have that group discussion and it comes from the players, then we can hold each other accountable to those, because it's something that we came up with as a group. Whereas if it was just me who just basically said, okay, this is what we want to do, then doesn't have the same meaning. But when it comes from the players and the group as a whole, it allows us to kind of go back and really talk about those things. And then a lot of the other thing, moving on to the kind of the legacy and what we talk about, that's really important with our group at St. Kitts. There was a lot of players through the ranks when I started at St. Kitts that didn't get an opportunity to play at the Premier level, but without their sacrifices, without their hard work, we wouldn't have been able to, to continue our success into the Premier Division, to make it to nationals, ultimately win nationals. So we always talk about, the legacy that was before us and those that put ourselves in a position to be successful. And I think that's so important. And then demanding and efficient practices. This is something that I'm really conscious of. And I think, looking back on the Husky season last season, something that I really thought we could probably done a little bit better job of, just being in terms of efficient. I thought we had great practices, but I thought we could be more efficient. And, just dealing with those different types of things. With school, it's a lot different. Or if you're at reps, you get more time, and, it's very easy to kind of get, good trainings and stuff like that. But when you're working with different levels, you kind of overlook how important it is to have efficient practices. So I would really encourage us as coaches to really prepare and dive into, how important it is to have a good practice, but also for it to be efficient. We can talk about that a little bit later. And then obviously you have your non-negotiables. I think for me, respect is a big one. A lot of people say being on time and, doing all these things right. But I think if you show respect, then you're always going to be on time. You're always going to show respect to your teammates and your opponents. You know, we talk about sweeping the sheds. I thought we did a great job of that with the Huskies this season, with just making sure that every locker room that we left it better than when we saw it. And just, you know, just creating that culture like we talked about, where, you know, we leave a positive mark on everywhere we go and every team that we encounter. So big one for us. But yeah, I think for me, those are the big ones, and I'm sure we can probably get into some more culture questions later. But I think that's, you know, really important to kind of just kickstart things off for us for this presentation. Once you've established culture, you know, I think it's important to have a system and style of play. You know, what to cover and when. It's really important to, you know, understand what's important at certain stage of the season. We're going to get into that in just a second, but I think one thing to understand is no two teams are the same. You're going to have things that have worked in the past with certain teams, might be certain actions or certain plays, but, you know, you're going to have different personnel. You know, it's very difficult, even in the high school, ranks, to bring back the same team. You're always going to have changes, and you're going to have players that come in and offer different strengths, different weaknesses. So I think understanding your personnel is so important, and being able to evolve and adapt to that personnel each year. Within your rep program, you have, you know, you might be able to, if you might be fortunate enough to have a team that you started with, and then, you know, they're bottom age and you can continue to build, but I think you still got to change the way that you coach in certain ways. So I think that's really important. But then I think, you know, with the system, you got to find the pace that you want to play with. Do you want to play fast? Do you want to grind teams down? What are the kind of shots that you want to create out of that high tempo offense? Do you want to, you know, or do you want to, you know, slow things down and roll it into the post and just, you know, force teams to have to foul you and frustrate teams by doing that? So identifying what your system looks like and what you guys value. I know, you know, Ross McMains is a really good coach, New Zealand coach, who works over at Louisville as an assistant. He has a scoring system at practices where he, you know, values 3-pointers and made baskets at the rim. So most of his practices will be a 3-1-3 system. So he's 3 points for 3, 1 point for something outside of the paint, and then 3 points at the rim. Stuff like that, I think, is really creative and helpful for your trainings to really establish what kind of shots you want to take. You can do that with, you know, pace as well, and say, hey, if we score within the first 6 seconds of a shot clock, you get 5 points for that bucket, or you get 3 points. So just getting creative around that, I think that's really important to establish your system and the way that you want to play. And then lastly, I think for me as a coach, you know, I watch a lot of games, and when I watch games, I always enjoy listening to the commentary, specifically Jeff Van Gundy and Mark Jackson, because they do such a good job of, you know, breaking down, you know, the insights of the game and you know, the one percenters. And I think game sense and IQ is a big part of what we do, and it can win you games and lose you games. I know, you know, throughout the course of the season, I really kind of put the teams and practices in situational stuff. So for example, we'll play situational games where there's 2 minutes left, and we'll just play a 2-minute game. One team's down 4 points with, you know, free throws to come. You know, how are we trying to speed the other team up? How are we trying to create turnovers? How are we trying to manage our lead? I think that stuff's really important to try and teach, you know, within the style of play and what you do. So I can't stress the importance of that, knowing the bonus, knowing how many fouls you have to give, knowing how to, you know, give a foul or take a foul. You know, now with the FIBA rules and those that watch the Olympics, you know, the USA really struggled with, you know, adapting to those FIBA rules, being able to take a foul without, you know, committing an unsportsmanlike, just teaching those things. And I think situational games and practices are really important to do that. And it just puts your team in the mindset, okay, that every possession counts, especially when we're dealing with late situations in games. So just, again, it's all about creativity, finding ways that you guys can put yourselves and the players, most importantly, in those positions to be successful. Moving on to structuring your season. So this still kind of ties into our culture and, you know, what we're doing, but, you know, I think it's so important to you know, do things as a team, build chemistry. This is a photo from our day that we went out to Bethel's Beach, and we did some some team building exercises out on the dunes. And, I genuinely think that was a huge part of our success. For that one day that we had, Carl Murray, Tane Murray's dad he basically led that, and we got out there and we just did a whole bunch of different fun games and worked in some dunes. So there was an element of fitness, but more importantly, there was an element of chemistry that I think, really built our on-court chemistry to another level. And we ended up having a feed afterwards after we, did some good exercises, worked together as a team. And I just noticed, even on court during trainings afterwards, there was just another level of trust, accountability, all those things that you're looking for to have a good, successful team. But I think in order for you to do that, you got to have the right team. And I think that's what goes back to, team selection, which I have at the top. Just thinking of different examples, like obviously, you're working with coaches on this chat. You guys will be, coaching at different levels, but I put in here 8 to 12. Your 8 to 12 is really important because let me use the representative space as an example. You might have some players that are between 8 and 12 that maybe not as good as some of the players in the B team, but the important thing is to understand is they fit a role. And I think that for team selection, that's really important to understand, because there's no point in having 4 to 5 ball handlers in one team, even though that maybe the fourth or fifth string ball handler is better than maybe your 10th or 11th guy. It's so important to have an understanding of, okay, my 9th guy can't handle the balls as well as some of the other guy, but he rebounds the shit out of the ball, or he's going to dive on the floor and he's going to put his body on the line. He has he has a very low expectations in terms of what he needs to do, but when he does jump on the floor, he's going to give you everything he's got. So I think identifying what those players, it might be as simple as someone just as a screener, just someone that goes out there is just going to free up space, set off ball screens, and is willing to go out there and just kind of flatline some guys if he needs to, and just do everything that he needs for a team. So I think when you're putting together a team, especially in the kind of the high school space and the representative space, it's so important to kind of have that 8 to 12. Who are the guys that you want? Now, if you're in a position where you got a couple of injuries, now you maybe potentially bringing someone up from the B team. Now you got this guy that maybe thought he was good enough to be in the A team. He's got that chip on his shoulder. He's been getting more reps, more game time. Now there's a situation where you can bring him up and he's got a point to prove, and maybe he's a little bit more confident. So I think it works hand in hand. There is good value in obviously picking the best 12 players, but in my experience and what I've been involved with, if you can get that 8 to 12, really knock it down and just say, hey, these guys can really help us in multiple ways. That obviously goes a long way. And then once you've got your team, it's really about creating an environment that, the players really enjoy. Obviously we talked about, generating demanding practices, practices that are really, that get the most out of. We understand that, the work needs to be put in. That's why I talked about being efficient with everything that you do. You want to be able to work hard, but you also want to enjoy it. I think big part of, I think thinking back to the Huskies season, I went and bought this big speaker. Matt knows the one that we had. And basically that came with us on every road trip. I packed it in my bag and I just knew we went on our first road trip to Canterbury and we didn't have any speaker. We didn't have a speaker in the car. We didn't have a speaker in the locker room. We got to the locker room. The gym was cold. I just remember going into the game and it's like, there's just something missing. And then, from there on, I brought the speaker. I went and got the speaker and I brought it everywhere. It came with us to practice, came with me in the suitcase. And that created an environment where everyone's, a little bit more upbeat, a little bit more excited to come in the gym. We had a Huskies playlist where guys were just adding songs to, the spot. Things like that are so important because, it brings everyone together. And again, a lot of the players in different teams, whether it's high school, whether it's reps, they're coming from different backgrounds. They're coming from different environments, like school. With the Huskies, obviously, we're dealing with players coming from work. So, you're dealing with so much. When you come to practice, you want them to be, you want them to look forward to that. And obviously, making it an upbeat and a fun environment is so important. doing that. So when we do work hard, we understand what we're working hard for, and we kind of build on that. Moving on to kind of the core fundamentals, that's, for me, that's really important. So just identifying what those core fundamentals are. Is it footwork? Is it a bit of everything? But just being consistent. I think when I first started at St. Kitts, I wanted to try and do everything. I wanted to try and teach left hand, right hand layups, opposite hand layups. I wanted to teach how to make different types of passes. I think that all gets tied in as you develop and evolve, but I think being consistent with what you're teaching and having a structure, and the players knowing what those fundamentals are and how they translate to games, is so important. So building your core fundamentals at the start of your season before you start with your with your preseason plan is really important, and then just building off that.
Aaron, can I just jump in for a second and just ask you about can you just talk maybe about the fundamentals that are most important to you in that period? And kind of a connected question to that is, how long is this preseason process for you? Like, how much time are you spending building these foundational kind of aspects of your team in terms of establishing chemistry, getting the environment right, it's clarifying roles? So, yeah.
For sure. So, I mean, for school, we have a little bit more. I mean, I guess Huskies and school is relatively the same. We're probably looking at like almost a month and a half, 6-week kind of time frame. That's kind of what we use for Huskies, and that's give or take the time that we use for school. I never start kind of week 1 of term 1 because there's a lot of shit going on with just getting into school and getting your routine. And I think if you just overload them with too much, yes, they're excited to play basketball and start that process. But, as Matt said, it's a long season. We're talking 3 months if you include preseason. I'm sorry, not 3 months, 3 terms. It's a long time. So you're looking at 6 or 7 months at least. So, give them a bit of time. But, preseason usually is about 6 weeks, and that gives you time to establish your core fundamentals. So for me, offensively, I really value like playing off 2 feet. Just really building your base and your core balance fundamentals of making good decisions under pressure, and just building off that. So a lot of 2 feet drills, a lot of small-sided games, and where players are making multiple decisions fast, 2-on-2, 3-on-3 breakdown stuff. I'm a big believer in on-ball teaching and just learning the basic reads out of making on-ball reads. A big part of the game now is there's a whole bunch of different ways to defend the on-ball. There's obviously a whole bunch of different ways to attack the on-ball. So just having, I think, building from the base up, and then from there you can get creative, and the players, once you've drilled that and ripped it, then you can kind of build up. So I teach a lot of on-ball stuff, and then obviously within that you teach on-ball defense. And I think that's important. And then from there, you can kind of get creative and add more stuff. But I would say that those are kind of the core fundamental stuff. A lot of passing. I do a lot of passing stuff. Tie that into with ball handling. We always do ball handling and passing together. I think those go hand in hand. I always teach my players and talk to my players about the importance of having a good handle. If you don't have a good handle, you're not going to be a good passer, because the time it takes for you to bounce that ball and pick it up and get rid of it is all dictated on how comfortable you are with dealing with pressure and getting that ball out of your hands. So we do a lot of ball handling and passing drills together and kind of build that in. So a regular practice for us looks like ball handling to start with, ball handling, passing. A lot of it's just repetition, getting the muscle memory going, and we use that as a warm-up, and then we drill that when we introduce that into our first drill or organized drill as a team, and we just build on that, and then from there it just kind of takes off.
So it just sounds like then that, and I know you'll transition to the next piece, but from a kind of a session design perspective, you're doing kind of warm-ups and drills at the initial, and then you've spoken a lot about games and small set of games and decision making. Is there a balance there where you like to go from maybe drills at the beginning into games as the core part of your training?
For sure. So just give an example of kind of like a regular training, especially with St. Kitts, would start 15-20 minutes of ball handling, of passing, and I'll get creative, but again, still have the core fundamental base of what you're teaching. So 2 feet, both hands, dealing with pressure. Those are kind of the three things that I really kind of focus in on. Use that to warm up. Music's going, so doesn't feel like they're just in a trance and they're just basically like, we're creating an environment where we're trying to work hard, but also build those core fundamentals. And then through that, we'll get, a drill that I do a lot of is just 2-on-2, like decision making out of on ball. So we're literally playing 2-on-2 in the half court, and someone can come and set a screen, guard or big, and you're just basically coming off the screen and you're reading what the defenders are doing. Are they switching? Are they in a mush? Are they in a hard show? And you're basically using your ball handling skills and you pick up to get rid of that ball. You make that pass, kick it back, and you're straight into an on ball. We might do that for 2 minutes and then switch offense to defense. And that gets us, again, getting used to making quick decisions. Defensively, it teaches us to apply pressure on the ball, gets us, in the mindset of working different on-ball coverages. And then from there, we'll layer it from 3-on-3, 4-on-4. We might do some shell stuff, and then we'll get into some 5-on-5 stuff at the end. And that's usually how I base most of our practices.
And my last question, with the piece around kind of ball handling and passing together, what are some of the drills that you like to do to kind of build that as it sounds like you've got some things you go back to almost like pretty frequently at the beginning of your team trainings to establish emphasis and to make that a point of focus. What are some of the things you like to do to train those things together in terms of drills? Yeah,
so we usually start off, in pairs and do a lot of stuff through contact. So let's say Matt and I were partners. Matt would stand in front of me. We'd work full court. We'd have a crossover combination with, some kind of maybe 2-ball stuff where we're just getting used to, basically kind of igniting our reflexes and getting rid of like crossover combination pass, get it back and just doing that. So one of us is working, one of us is just facilitating, and then we'd switch. Then we'd get straight into some contact stuff. So we might go full court with a outside leg plant, dealing with pressure and just getting into and obviously defensively, you're working on pressuring, containing the ball. And then from there, we'll get into like maybe a full court 1-on-1 situation where you're playing 1-on-1 to the half, then you're playing 1-on-1 to the half that's not live. If you beat your man, you're allowing him to recover. I always introduce rules where like your defense, you're allowed to foul. And you're allowed to basically, because it's an offensive drill. So I'll say, hey, this is an offensive drill. So defense, we're not teaching bad habits right now. This is an offensive drill. So we want to make this offensive player uncomfortable. So you're allowed to slap. You're allowed to push them off balance. You're allowed to try and steal the ball. And then obviously we can do that. And then once you get over the half, it's like, it's a 1-on-1 situation. Now fouls are included and just kind of stuff like that. And then obviously building up from there, but a lot of stuff of dealing with pressure. Matt talked about it. We've talked about it. Like when we went to Australia and played at that World Cup level in under 17s, that was always our thing. We couldn't deal with pressure. And those that have coached at that under 17 level, at the national level, and gone to different tournaments, we always have some of the highest turnover rate within the tournament. And that's because we're not used to dealing with pressure. So just finding different ways to simulate that. And in the preseason, that obviously establishes the kind of the mindset that you're going to have for the season. It's not going to be easy. We talk about, being comfortable with being comfortable, getting used to being uncomfortable. So being comfortable with being uncomfortable. Yeah, that's a big part of what we do. Cool. And then, so with that, within a kind of on a different topic, role clarity with players, I think we all understand how important that is, especially if you have selected a team like we talked about at the start, between that 8 to 12. Maybe those guys aren't seeing as much game time, but if they have a role and it's specific to what they specific to why they understand why they've been selected on this team, and maybe they say, hey, they're not as talented, but you're gonna execute your role, and that's how you're gonna help this team. And I think if everyone understands that, then you're gonna have a successful team. Where you can obviously run into issues is if you feel players think that they can do more. So you're always gonna have that, especially with players. You're gonna deal with that, especially as you kind of move up the ranks. But it's about having those honest conversations with those players and just saying, hey, this is who is in front of you at the 2 spot, at the 5 spot. This is what you need to do if you want to maybe challenge them for game time or try and make it into the rotation. And if they don't understand that, well, then that's where, you bring in film and you have those honest conversations, and you just show them and just tell them, hey, this is my decision. You got to trust me on this. This is what I think is best for the team. But this is what I need you to do if you want to make a real mark on this team, and maybe add yourself into that rotation and make an impact with your game time. So having that role clarity is so important, and having those conversations. And usually your top 2 or 3 guys are okay. So it's really about focusing on some of those guys at the end of your bench that don't get as much game time, and just having that constant communication. That's something that I'm always, they're not easy conversations, but it's something that I've definitely kind of reflected on, and just understand how important those conversations are as you learn, as you grow and as you develop throughout the course of the season. And then obviously we talk about our values. Values are consistent through preseason, in season, and off season. Moving into obviously you're in the middle of the season, and what that looks like. And I think these are some of the things that are really important to kind of establish if you want to have success, and having those winning habits is something that we talk about a lot. Those can be whatever you want to come up with as a coach. We talk about core fundamentals, and those don't change. So, your preseason, you don't just go, drills, fundamentals at the preseason, and you get into the season. Like, those are consistent throughout the course of your season as well. And you teach them and you build them in. And I would almost say that's more important than, running 5-on-0s and running, 5-on-5. Like, you have to have that element of fundamentals in your practices throughout the course of your season, because that's what ultimately allows those players to get better. And then obviously the execution of that will come in a 5-on-5 when you're executing reads and making plays. If you have that base foundation of your core fundamentals, then that's when you're going to succeed. The health, we talk about mental and physical health. It's about, for me, that's really about understanding your team. And I think if you have good leaders, and this is where I would encourage you guys to have, a leadership group that you have a strong relationship and a strong trust with, that kind of become basically a messenger for for what the team is doing. That I think that really helped with me with the team, with the Huskies team this past season. Just getting a feel. There was times where, we were going to have a training, but Brooke and a few of the other leaders just messaged me and said, hey, the general feeling of the players is, we're naked. We don't have any energy. I think we'd be taking a step backwards if we had practice tonight. And you have to trust that that's the right thing to do, as much as you want to practice and train and get better as a coach. Ultimately, the most important thing is mental and physical health. And, a lot of players and stuff are sacrificing so much. And I think that goes a long way. So just having a really good understanding of what your team is, where your team's at, when they need that break, that mental break, and, obviously ultimately physically allowing them to recover and get ready for those next practices and those next games. Our messaging was always peaking at the game time, peaking for game time. So when you get into that court, when we step onto that court for game time, or when we're getting ready for a tournament, that's what we're building for, so that we can obviously be successful when that whistle blows. Moving on to scout, this is something that I've been very in tune with. This is something that I try and encourage and bring into our culture from the jump. And obviously film is a big part of that. I would encourage any coaches that are just starting to get into the mix of coaching to find some video background. There's some different programs and software out there, but any kind of video I think helps. Any kind of feedback within it, from a training point of view, from a game point of view, can really be important. But obviously scout is important as well. So just being prepared for your teammates. I'm going to talk about a little bit about that when we get into our preparing for a national tournament or preparing for playoffs, and the importance of that. But scout and film are really important, just the importance of that. And then sacrifices. We talk about this a lot. I think when you get in the bulk of your season, sacrifices are, just having your own personal sacrifices, but also the sacrifices as a team. And I think if everyone buys into that, it can really go a long way in terms of the success of your group. And if you know the guy next to you is making sacrifices, then it's going to obviously motivate you and encourage you to do the same. So one thing that we did at St. Kitts, we've done pretty much every year that I've been there, is when we get into term 3, we call it sacrifice season. We've made sacrifices along the course of the season, but like we talked about, it's such a long season. When we get into that term 3, that's we know that's our time to lock in. So, you know, for me, I make my sacrifice. Everyone knows what each other's sacrifices are. Usually we would team some people up and we would just call it sacrifice season. And again, it allows us to, you know, hold each other accountable, and ultimately, you know, build sacrifices and habits that will hopefully long-term benefit them outside of basketball, not just for, you know, for a specific tournament. So it's just, again, going back to those winning habits that I talked about at the start.
Hey, Aaron, so just a couple of questions here in this space.
Yeah.
So when you get, obviously now you've shifted into the in-season phase. Obviously games are now a part of the season. You're playing games on a more regular basis. You're prepping, you're trying to build to end of season success with an end of season tournament, which I think most people can relate to. Can you talk about the difference between, like, I guess the way in which you approach games and the development of your value system and your habits? You've talked a lot about habits and fundamentals and values, and not a lot necessarily about kind of like tactical adjustments and game. Like, I know it's obviously game planning and scouting is important, but how do you manage this tension between building this sort of player foundation, like the player skill foundation of habits and values and fundamentals and core decisions, with the short-term need to like win the game? You know, like, I know we can win the game if we do this, but I know that it's better off our team in the long term if we get better at this. Like, how do you manage that tension in terms of like that in the games, and then that relationship, like going back in between games? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. I think it's obviously something that you're obviously always trying to juggle, right? So you're just, you're really trying to pinpoint what's important to your group. Now, you might have a team that's very talented and have got a great core balance, you know, base or foundation of fundamentals, and they can great shooters. So maybe in that sense, that maybe core fundamentals are important, but maybe you're kind of more focused on the tactical side of things. So a great example is when I worked 2019, I was an assistant coach with the Wellington Saints, with Paulie, and we had a great team. We ended up going undefeated, but we had guys like Nick Kay, Shea Lee, Ruben Tarangi, guys that have played at a high level, and were really, and Rob Lowe was on that team, like guys, extremely high IQ players. And I just remember that, you know, the times that I was there at practices, that, you know, fundamentals were still a huge part of what they did. But at the same time, the tactical side of the game was at such a high level. And then obviously, you know, let's say at a high school level, or even potentially at some of the other NBL teams, because they needed to be challenged, and you were coming up against other good teams, Hawke's Bay, Southland Sharks, that are also very well drilled and well, you know, high level coaches. So, you know, you get into that chess match, and those kind of teams and those kind of players, it's really important to challenge them mentally and you know, try and tap into that IQ. Whereas, you know, at the foundation, you know, at the level, you know, the high school level, at the representative level, these players are very much still learning the game. So it's about really understanding that and really building your core fundamentals that are ultimately going to help them when they progress and go into that next level, whatever that next level is. Maybe it's from making the jump from the B team to the A team, or moving from the under 15s to the under 17s. If you don't have those fundamentals, those core winning habits, or those core fundamentals, you're not going to develop as the way that you need to going forward. So I think understanding the kind of team that you have is important, but I think there's a space for fundamentals in every team. But then it's obviously having a recognition of the kind of team that you have. Is it a team that, you know, one thing that I struggle with, or it's always a challenge, is at St. Kitts, you know, we usually have 2 or 3 players that are at a New Zealand level, but then kind of my 9 to 12 guys are, you know, students that, you know, maybe basketball wasn't their number one intention when they started playing, when they first started school, but, you know, they got into it, and they kind of basically late bloomers. So they don't have that base fundamental kind of background, and maybe someone like a Dante or a Caslow or Alex McDonald. Those guys have had a lot more experience. So it's how do you tie those things in? And a lot of teams are going to have that same kind of catch-22, is like, how do you challenge those guys, but also challenge the ones that are at very beginning stages? And you just do it by doing everything as a team. I think that's the success that I've had, is you don't treat those guys differently to anyone else. Yeah. And you challenge them in the same sense. And there's always space for fundamentals, even if, you know, the stuff that we're doing is easier for some other guys. Doesn't matter. That's besides the point. It's about building our core values within that team. Cool. I think, does that kind of tie?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think that's really great, because I think that one of the things that I hear loud and clear coming out of that is, you know, as you move down from professional teams into amateur teams, rep teams, high school teams, and obviously lower, the emphasis is increasingly more on habits, foundations, values. Always important, never not important. But if you're a coach, you know, the amount of time that you spend on a scout for, say, a under 15 or an under 13 team is going to be dramatically different from the amount that you're going to spend, obviously, as a high school team and certainly an NBL or a professional team. And so I think that's a key. And maybe it's worth, you know, bringing in Cairo's question, Matt, because I think that's an appropriate question to ask, you know, at this point around scouting.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously you've got a huge amount of experience with that, Aaron. But that question is, how detailed is your scout? And then do you present that? Do you present the same detail at the high school level, I'm assuming, compared with the Huskies, for example?
Yeah, no, great question. I think to answer the question about detail, I would say very similar in terms of the length of the scout. So I try and keep everything within one page, or maybe back to front. And very similar in the sense that we understand where our focus is. Offensively, we know what we're trying to achieve. We go back to our system and we tie in, you know, this is how we can target these guys. This is how we can attack them. Usually having an understanding of kind of how they defend the pick and roll. I think that's a big part of our scout. So that week leading into practice, we're practicing getting those reps. Now, you might get, you know, at the high school level, you know, they might change it or they might run a zone. So being prepared for those different situations is always important. But very similar, I would say, at the high school level and the Huskies program, at the Huskies level. I think probably the only difference is at the Huskies level, it's a lot more detailed in terms of execution, personnel, actions. There's obviously more to cover. Whereas at the high school level, it's probably a little bit more, you know, predictable, and you can kind of prepare a little bit more for certain things because you've seen that team before. You know how the coaches are going to run. You've seen those players, so you know. Again, those fundamental things that you've seen already usually don't change too much at the high school level. Whereas at the next level, when you're dealing with better coaches, they're always trying to add new things to become less predictable. So I think that's the biggest one. I will say at the high school level, because I've had that video background, I always try to include, you know, scout into every game. And that's what I was going to talk about, going into playoffs, tournament run and finals. That's where your scout pays off, because you have that base kind of understanding of kind of how to prepare for a team. Now, usually in the course of a season at the high school level, at the representative level, you might have 1 game a week or 2 games a week, but nonetheless, you have that habit that you've built throughout the course of the season where you've prepared for a team. So when you get into that tournament setting, or when you get into that finals run, playoffs, whatever, whether it's a single game, a semifinal, a tournament, it's not foreign. So it's not like when you're sitting down in the classroom or sitting down at the stadium and you're going through film, and the guy's like, what are we doing right now? Like, I don't know what this is. Like, what is this? I don't know how to understand this. Coach is obviously, you know, he's panicking because he's doing all the stuff that's new. But having that, obviously, that core habit at the start of, you know, from the start of the season to the end is really important. And then obviously just when you get into that finals mode, again, it allows you to prepare for other teams. But yeah, I think that kind of ties in to kind of, I mean, the overall kind of scout process. I think that, you know, for me, it's always been a part of what I do. So it's easier for me to include. I always try and get creative and a little bit funny, or add little things into the scout. The Word document, definitely in film, I try and add things that, you know, might be something just to keep them, you know, upbeat and just engaged. You know, obviously you can have film sessions that can kind of drag on. I try and keep my film sessions 15 to 20 minutes. There's a time and a place where it can be longer, and there's a time and a place where you just, like, all you got to do is show a highlight reel and just say, hey, we know what we got to do. Let's get this win, and let's just trust our work. And I think that's really important going into a playoff setting. It's just trusting the work that you've put in, and you know, as a coach and as a team, the amount of work that you've put in. And I think, you know, ultimately that gives you confidence going into a finals run. Talked about peaking at the right time. That was always our message. That's always been our message at St. Kitts. Nationals is our, you know, not to get ahead of ourselves, because regionals, you got to qualify first, but that regional tournament and nationals is what we're getting ready for. Yes, the Auckland competition is important, and it's a great opportunity to get great games, but winning the Auckland competition isn't our primary goal. That's not our pinnacle event. If we win it, that's great. That's something that we can tick off the box and say, hey, we're the best team in that competition. But I think having, you know, an outline and an understanding of what you're getting ready for, it allows you to build through tough losses. Like, you know, I've thinking back to the last 3 or 4 years at the Premier level, we've had some tough losses, but ultimately those tough losses, you know, got us over the line and put ourselves in a position when it counted to you know, be better in those situations where it was close and we had to, you know, make winning plays. So peaking at the right time is what we always talk about, physically, mentally, and obviously going back to those fundamentals, Vince, those core fundamentals pay off. You know, those winning moments, those winning plays, when, you know, it's a 65-60 game with 2 minutes left, you're expected to beat this team, or you're not expected to beat this team, and it comes down to 1 or 2 plays, and you have that core fundamental base that you can rely on and tap into in those key moments. That's where it pays off. And I think if you can establish that from the start, then that obviously that's what you're trying to do from a long-term point of view.
Just on that one, like, if you think about, like, late tournaments, right? Quarterfinals, semifinals, finals, second half of games in particular, people are tired. When you think about, like, the fundamentals that matter most then, right? Because it's like, maybe you've had a good first half, the game was close, they've made a run, or you're trying to make a run and push it. Like, in that part of a tournament at the very end of the season, what are those sort of, like, habits and fundamentals that matter the most at the end?
I would say probably the number one thing for me is fitness. So just being fit and being your body physically and mentally being in a position where you're clear with the decisions that you're making. So I think fitness is probably number one. In terms of skill set and fundamentals from a basketball point of view, for me, it's all about making decisions under pressure. Like, that's what we always talk about. I know I talked about it earlier, but if you establish that within the context of every practice, when you get into those situations in that environment where it's high stakes, there's a big crowd, you know, you're trying to claw your way back, or you're just trying to make a couple of plays. If you're used to that pressure that's built through practice, it makes it obviously easier to kind of execute what you're trying to do. So again, playing off 2 feet, being ready to make decisions. I work a lot on footwork when you catch the ball. So playing ahead of the game, playing into space is so important. And that's something that I try and drill all the time. It drives me crazy when someone catches the ball on the wing, not ready to shoot, but okay, you don't have a shot. Maybe you're not ready to shoot. You should have been ready to shoot, but you're not. So what's your next option? And it drives me crazy when someone catches the ball, they have a wide open space in front of them in the key, and they catch it and they kind of look around, and then, oh, now it's open. So just teaching those split second decisions, playing into space is something that we always talk about, and playing ahead of the game. So, seeing someone open in the corner as that guy's closing out to you, before you catch the ball, you're passing them that ball. As opposed to catching that thing, oh shit, someone's on me, now I'm going to make that pass. Like, you should be able to make that decision. And if you watch enough at the high levels, like obviously the elite LeBron and those guys, you see those passes where, he catches it and just throws it, and he knows what the defenders are going to do. Obviously that's the elite level, but you can do it at a basic level. Like, you can do it where you're teaching those quick decisions before you actually catch the ball. So I think that those are the kind of the core fundamental teachings that I try and teach from the jump. And then ultimately, hopefully, those execute when you get on court. And
I think that's really cool, and definitely makes me think about teams that I've coached this year, and that being something that, being a bit better in some of those spaces would have helped us. I am conscious that we're nearing the end here, and we've got some questions here in the chat. So Matt, do you want to walk through some of these questions that I think might be suitable? And I know that we've still got a few things probably still to go through. Hey, but people can hang around if they want after 6 o'clock.
Cool. Yeah. One of the questions we had during the registration, but also here, from Andrew and Louis, is the most important factors for choosing players for your team. What do you value? What are you looking for?
Yeah, I mean, obviously high character. I talk a lot about ego, like just being able to understand managing your ego. Like, you have to be willing to understand, like, for me, you have to be realistic with where you're at. Like, there might be some players that, obviously we all know different examples of players that think that they're better than they are. It's about obviously managing that, but also ultimately getting the most out of them. So, players that are unrealistic with where they sit and what they understand, like what they understand that they can do. Those are probably the most difficult players to try and manage, because they obviously think that they're a lot better than that they are. And as a coach, you've got to obviously try and teach them and help them understand, okay, this is where you are. This is the reason why you're not playing. And if they don't understand that, then obviously that's something that you're going to have to manage. And I think, like I said, film is a big part of that, giving them clear-cut evidence to say, this is the reason why you're struggling. This is the reason why you're not getting as much game time. So high character people that understand that are realistic with where they're at, and just ultimately want to get better and work hard to try and prove to themselves and to the team that they have a role within the team. And the players that understand their role and work hard at doing whatever it takes to make the team successful, those are kind of the players that we're looking for. And it usually, again, it comes into the 8 to 12, those 8 to 12 selections, and just finding what you need as a team. I've got 3 point guards. I've got a couple of shooters. I've got 1 or 2 bigs, a little bit short in the bigs department. Is there someone that's not as skilled, not as talented, but can give us some insurance in those moments where we might need a sub, might need 2 or 3 minutes, where we can just trust him to go and get 3 or 4 rebounds. And that buys us time to maybe give those bigs a rotation. It might be the other way around. We only got 1 point guard, a whole bunch of bigs. All right, well, we need someone to obviously fill a role as a backup point position, because we need someone to kind of handle that pressure in those crucial moments while our starting point guard is getting a rest. So just understanding those things and understanding your team is probably the most important thing. And then high character.
It sounds like you really value, kind of after your sort of core rotation players, you really value high character kids who, who embrace kind of where they are and what they do, want to keep getting better, want to find ways to contribute to the team, and that potentially you're willing to sacrifice some skill for like some all-around skill for some specialist skill and some just team first attitude and effort and all of that stuff.
100%. Yep.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. Next question from Corey. Obviously, mental health is such a prevalent topic at the moment, particularly in youth sports. So his question is, really appreciate focus on mental and physical health over the course of the season and peaking. Are you using any external app or program to track TSS, training stress score, sleep, mental health, and fitness over the season?
Yeah. For me, obviously very conscious of that in our space. Really important to especially when you're dealing with high school athletes. You know, it's a very important subject. I think for me, it goes back to the environment that you create, right? Like I always try and teach or kind of install the importance of when we come together as a team. I know it's not easy, but to your best capabilities, try and leave everything. When you come into the gym on just a fresh mindset and a fresh headspace. I know that's not easy for some players because different players are dealing with different things, but that goes back to creating that environment that's enjoyable, where you feel like you're progressing, you're getting better, you're developing, and obviously most importantly that brotherhood where everyone's coming together and ultimately you're progressing as a team. So if you have that environment, I think that can go a long way in terms of mental health. And I don't like using the word escape because, you ultimately you want it to be much more than that. But, it is a good way for especially high school adolescent women, girls and boys to just be able to kind of, maybe release some tension or release some energy from their day. And it allows them obviously to get a good exercise. So just really building on that. So I think, yeah, definitely your environment. In terms of apps, we used Headspace, which is a great app. They have some NBA coaching things that we use. So that made it relatable. There was some NBA players that did some sound bites on there. So we used to do that kind of not every week, but I think we did it a few times. But going into a big game, I would just put kind of like a Headspace meditation thing on just to kind of quieten the mind, bring everyone back to the present moment. So I think Headspace is a great one to use. I haven't really experimented with too much else, but I think that's definitely an app that I would recommend.
Maybe Vince, you want to go one more, or do you want to move on?
Well, I'm just going to say, it's 6:04 and we've already gone over the initial planned time, but we're going to hang out. We're going to keep going through. We want Aaron to go through all of his slides and whatnot. But if you have to leave, we understand that. Thanks for joining. This is being recorded and will be posted online if you want to catch the back 15 minutes or so. But if you're keen to stay on, then we'll just keep rolling.
Awesome. Yeah. Sorry, I'm trying to.
That's okay.
Trying to get through this as quick as I can, but
that's all right. It's great stuff. It's really good stuff. So yeah, no, we're good.
We'll go into just preparing for a national tournament. This is obviously very relatable to a lot of you coaches out there that are in a high school space or representative space. Very similar to what we just talked about. Keeping everyone together, I think, is a really important thing. Even if I've had a couple of situations where I coached the Auckland under-17 team where the Nationals was in Auckland. We got together and actually rented a house so that everyone stayed together and we ate meals together. I think anytime you can do this, obviously if it's out of town, you're going to have that anyway, but, keeping everyone together is really important, I think, in my eyes. Takes away the stress of worrying about players getting in, getting to the game on time and people being late, getting stuck in traffic, especially in Auckland. So I think that's really important. Film and scout. So we talked about that a little bit. I think when you're in a tournament setting, it's so important for you guys to watch teams as a team, as a group. So especially teams that you have in your pool, potentially a team that you think that you potentially might meet in a quarterfinal or a semifinal, even if, they might not be in your pool. It's just kind of giving an understanding of, who their key guys are, the way that they like to play, maybe some areas that you can attack them and get them to basically find different ways to basically exploit them. And it gets the boys talking, try not to get them to understand, or try not to get them thinking too far ahead. So for example, if you're Harbour and you're Canterbury are in the other pool and you're probably most likely not going to see them into the final, or you don't want to all be focused all on Canterbury, right? Because you have a handful of games leading into that pinnacle event or that pinnacle final. But at the same time, it's important for you to understand the kind of players that they have and the kind of way that they run, because when you do get into that finals matchup or that semifinal matchup and it's a big game, it's like, okay, we have an understanding of what they do. So I think that's really important. I'm a big believer, and this is maybe a little bit different to some other approaches, but I'm a big believer in playing your best players the most. So if you have a team that goes 6 deep or 7 deep, then I'm playing my seven players. If those other players aren't ready for that moment. Now, as a coach, that's not ideal because you want to have everyone ready, but you usually want to have a rotation. My advice is probably to have a 7-8 man rotation, so that when you get into that tournament setting, everyone's clear on what they can do and you're executing what you need to. But it's also important to get other people, involved in the games for potentially rest for some of your key guys, especially if it's a tournament setting. So, you're playing 2 games a day. So maybe you're comfortably up, or maybe not the other way around, but maybe you're down by 20 or 30 points and you have a big game, maybe a big quarterfinal game because you've lost one of your pool games to a good team. Like, you have to be smart in terms of how you approach it, so that when you get into that game that is do or die, your best players are playing the most minutes. That doesn't mean that you play your 5 guys for 40 minutes, but it means that you're playing your best players at the right moments. And I think that's such an important thing. And I've found success. Like, yes, it's important to get players game time, and it's important to share that game, that share the love. But for me, it's about winning those national tournaments. And if that means that my best player plays 40 minutes, then that means that he plays 40 minutes. Now, if he needs a break, then we hopefully have that trust and that relationship to say, hey, I need a break. Sometimes they won't say it because they're too stubborn, i.e. Zach Riley. He's someone that always just goes flat out. And if you ask him if he needs a break, he'll look at you like you're crazy. But everyone obviously needs some rest. So as a coach, you've got to manage those moments as well. But I'm a big believer in playing your best players the most and in those big moments, and obviously preparing them for that. And then ultimately, everyone understands their role and enjoys it. And that goes back to the 8 to 12. Maybe those 8 to 12 kind of aren't getting as much game time in those quarterfinal, semifinal moments, but they understood their role, and they're still supportive of the team's success. And ultimately, they want the team to win just as much as anyone else.
How do you manage foul trouble, just in that sense?
Yeah.
Like, particularly if you're leaning heavily on, 7 or 8 man rotation, have a ton of depth in certain spots. Like, what, officiating can be variable depending on the tournament and where we're at. We all know that. Like, what's your approach to fouling? Do you take people out right after two fouls in the first quarter? Or have you built in a kind of no fouling kind of culture around, your defensive habits? Like, what's the fouling?
No, so that's a really important, obviously, something to be prepared for. With St. Kitts, we've never had the deepest roster. So, a big part of our success is keeping our best players on, especially in that first half. And anytime you can you're dealing with foul trouble early, it's obviously a situation that you want to be in. So teaching not to foul is obviously number one. But like you said, Vince, there's going to be different circumstances where referees are calling different things, and you have to be prepared for those moments. And that's where, again, the 8 to 12 is so important, because just because they're not maybe expected or maybe not ready to play in those moments, they have to also be, prepared mentally to be able to jump in there and do their part. And I guess that comes back to the role clarity and saying, hey, if such and such gets in foul trouble early, you're first off the bench. And if you have that conversation with him pre-game or even leading up into those games, and you've been in those moments before within the season, that goes a long way, obviously.
Yeah.
All good. Going into the off season, just talking about just reflection. I think it's important. Just having, player meetings is really important. I think just reflecting on the season, getting their feedback. Where do they think, we had good success? Where do they think that as a coach, I could have done a better job? I think having that honest feedback is always important from your players. They're the ones that, we're trying to benefit. We're the ones that we're trying to set up for future success. So having that feedback is really important. And then from a personal point of view, just, it's a time for growth and reflection. So just looking back and it's a good time to say, hey, this is something that worked really well, but more importantly, this is something that I think we could have done a better job of. And I think for me as a coach, the Husky season was no better example from that. There was a lot going on. It was my first year coaching at the New Zealand National League level. There's a lot of things I would have done slightly differently, but having that reflection process, and now that we've been in lockdown, it's been a good time to be able to really prepare for the future and obviously learn from some of those moments that probably didn't go as well, or something that we could do a better job of. I think, and then moving on to consistency, it's a good time to obviously reset, but the work must remain consistent. And I think that's a great time for players to be in the gym, to really keep things consistent. And, it doesn't have to be 2 hours, 3 hours a day, but it has to be consistent. I always try and talk about the value, the overall value of your sessions in terms of, and the efficiency. So keeping things short and sharp, but keeping it consistent over the course of a week, and then ultimately a month, and then leading into the next season. So, you could have a great 2-hour workout and you're working extremely hard, or an hour and a half, you get up 500 shots, you're working on your ball handling, you're working on your shooting, your defense, everything. But if you only do that twice a week versus someone that's doing it, 45 minute block every day with maybe one day off, the person that's doing it every day is going to have more reps and more, more experience. And ultimately that's what allows that player growth. So creating that environment and that consistency where players want to come back, and not running them into the ground, especially in the off season, but it has to be consistent. And I think that's something that I try and, especially in the off season, term 4, term 1, just really try and build that, so that players are hungry to come back into the gym, as opposed to, oh man, that workout was hard, maybe they lose focus. Like we talked about earlier, it's a long season. If you're working out an hour and a half, 2 hours a day for 11 months of the year, 12 months of the year, like at some stage you're going to burn out, especially with everything else that they're having to juggle and manage at a high school level, or at a adolescent level. So just being smart with that, but it does have to be consistent. And then encouraging them to do their own work in their own time. Everyone can get, I think one thing that lockdowns taught us is that we can get creative at home with some ball handling stuff and some basic shooting form stuff. And I think the more that we can keep those things, that messaging consistent and the work consistent, that will ultimately help us develop more. And then lastly, with just balance, for me, golf is what I love to kind of balance my stuff out with. It's a good way for me to get out and just kind of freshen up my mind, take my mind off things. As coaches, I think it's really important to find that hobby that, you're not just invested in coaching. For me, it's that escape, or that way to get away from things is golf. So I enjoy kind of that balance side of things. And I think that allows you to come back fresher that next season, or fresher that next practice, and really, value that time with that group. Awesome. Last thing I wanted to show, this was just a little quote. This was something that I sent out to my players last year when we went through our first lockdown that ultimately ended our season, and we didn't get a nationals. We wanted that opportunity to repeat, but we talked about the journey, the destination, but ultimately for me it's the company that you keep, and those bonds and those relationships that you build over the years. That's for me, that's a winning, those are winning moments. Those are things that you won't forget. So a great little quote that resonated well with me. And I think it's obviously important to understand during these tough times where we wish we can be in the gym. We wish we could be working with our players. We're going to obviously appreciate those moments more when we get back together. And we're going to appreciate them because of the company that we surround ourselves with. So that's all my presentation. I tried to keep it as short as possible, but it went a little bit longer. But like I said, thanks again, Vince and Matt, for having me on, and happy to talk about anything else.
That's really awesome, Aaron. So much just great little nuggets. And what I really appreciate is the way in which you kind of package the whole thing. It feels like when you're hearing this, yeah, this guy gets it. Like has a deep understanding of not only the performance side of what it takes to produce a winning team, but also doing it in a way that looks after the people, that's honest with them, that is developmental oriented towards them. and is also very much in line with, I think, all the things we're learning now about what great coaches do. Small sided games, health and well-being focus, great culture, togetherness, positive. So it makes sense. It makes sense why you've been able to do what you've been doing. Matt, do you want to just share any other questions that we've got from folks, and maybe any questions that you've got?
Yeah, we'll fire through a few here. So you mentioned actually when you're selecting or talking about what's important to you in selecting players, and that those with maybe their expectations being a little bit skewed, those can be difficult. So just kind of a two-parter here from Doug Courtney. How did players respond to you about what you wanted from them and what they want and what they wanted to do? So what you wanted from them and what they wanted to do. Roles versus minutes. How was that conveyed during the season? Did their roles evolve and or grow? For example, Zach Riley.
It's one of those things where, as a coach, you just have to be, again, goes back to just really understanding your group, understanding the right time. I think timing is everything. I mean, for example, like if you're doing a team building exercise or you're out for a team dinner, that's not the right time to talk to someone that's probably sitting, a little bit frustrated with their role or lack of opportunity. You're not going to do that, because that's that time and space is for the team. So for me, it's about understanding, like, there was a couple of moments during the Husky season where, I had a feeling where players expected that they were probably going to contribute more throughout the course of the season. They weren't given that opportunity because guys like Zach and Dante stepped up, and you never knew what they were going to be able to do. But once their roles increased, that obviously meant that there was less opportunities for some of the more experienced players. So it's about being proactive in those situations to have those conversations. And they're not easy conversations, but it goes back to saying, hey, this is who's in front of you. This is why they're in front of you. This is what I need you to do at practice to show that you're still engaged, that you still have that mindset to be ready for your moment. A good example of that was Chris McIntosh, who, again, he was one of those players that at the start of the season or preseason, we saw as someone that could really make an impact with his shooting. Great shooter, but obviously because Zach's role increased, his role kind of wasn't as he didn't have as big of a role, but there were still moments in different, high pressure, high stake games where we needed him to go in and, hit 2 or 3 threes against his own. So it's about staying consistent with that conversation and say, hey, Chris, just stay ready. And that's during the game. And then obviously before and after the game, it's also having that conversation. Hey, and he sees the success that Zach's having. So it's not like he's, delusional in the sense that, like, I should be playing in front of him. It's not easy for him to understand, but he also understands it. So just having those conversations at the right time, I think before and after practices are great. And like I said, having that film ready for those players is really important.
Cool. A lot of interest in just the culture piece and how you go about building your culture. So Tim has asked, are there any things that you say or do or drill at every practice that are key to building your culture? And then Pete has also asked, any effective team culture activities that you've used in the past or learned from other teams?
Yeah, so I think, I've experimented with different things, some core things that we do at most practices. Again, I think it goes back to just understanding your group. I think really understanding, like, where you're at as a team. Is this a practice where we need to, from the very start, we need to come in and just do some, we just need to get straight to work? Or is this a practice where we need to understand, hey, we've come off a bad loss. Let's try and do something a little bit, lighthearted, a little bit more fun to just kind of kick things off, just to get the, the vibe back and just appreciate each other's company and understand that, hey, it was a single loss, but we can move on from that. So, having different drills and activities and, games, we play we're fortunate at St. Kit's, we got a decent sized gym. So we try and do a lot of, we play a little bit of soccer. We play, maybe some American football. We'll get outside and run around and play some touch or something like that instead of, usually I don't tell the players that. Usually it's something like, hey, we get the rugby ball, let's go out, we're playing, and we have teams organized. So it's not, you're not trying to organize too much. It's like we're straight into it. Winning. Sometimes we have starters versus, you have teams that are prepared for that whole season. And those kind of same teams are kind of organized in those those fun games. And then you could say, hey, the winner of this game gets to start the first possession of practice, or, they get 5 extra points in a game or something like that. So in terms of culture, I think those kind of, again, understanding where your team sits and what they need is really important. But drills, I would say, I think it's really about the structure of kind of what we're prepared to hold each other accountable to within our values. And we do that within every structure of our practice. So whether it's, if we feel like the start practice or the scrimmages or, whatever drill that we're doing isn't at the level, it's like, hey, fellas, like I talked about at the start, like, I'm going to keep it real with you. And they know that that real word equates to our values. And then automatically that triggers them and says, okay, we're not at the level that we need to be at our practice. And then obviously highlighting it when it is at a good level to say, hey, fellas, we're clicking on all cylinders right now. We're getting the most out of this time and we're efficient. We need to do this more often and just, kind of continue to generate that stuff. So yeah, I think that's probably a big part of what we do.
Cool. Well, I only got 2 or 3 more here. From Justine Reed, what is your philosophy on individual player development and assisting players with post-high school opportunities? Yeah,
so player development. So in terms of, what's the first part of the question?
Just what's your philosophy on individual player development and then assisting players with post-high school opportunities? Yeah,
so I mean, really the development side of things, again, it comes back to, I think what you're trying to establish. What are some goals? What are the things that you want to try and push each individual to try and maximize their potential? And I think that's ultimately, as a coach, that's what we're trying to do, right? So having a plan, having personal goals within each individual is important. We talk a lot about habits. So, for each individual, those habits could be different. Some, maybe one individual struggles to, I don't know, maybe, for example, they can't stay off social media. That's probably something that's a lot more realistic with the age that we're teaching. So it's like, okay, what can we do to try and encourage them to say, hey, that stuff can wait, but you're in an important stage in your development process to say, okay, this is what you need to sacrifice. And these are the habits that you need to build to obviously understand that the importance of every minute. The time that you have now is a crucial point in your development to getting better as a player. So it's all about maximizing that time, maximizing your recovery, maximizing your nutrition, your sleep, all that stuff. And just having those consistent conversations, sitting down with them and just checking in on them. And obviously, as a coach, it's up to you to create the environment where they're being challenged. I think that's probably not the hardest part. I think it's everything outside of that is really important. Managing them in different spaces, whether it's school, checking in on their grades, and just being someone that they can talk to and have trust in. I think that's a really key part of their fundamental, their stages of, development long-term. And then in terms of, post high school and their, those pathways that we want to try and create for, playing professionally, playing in college, definitely a space that I'm looking to grow in and want to try and establish those connections as much as I can. So just building those connections outside of New Zealand, I think, is important. And, the more that you coach and the more connections that you build, that ultimately helps. And then just being supportive, doing whatever they need, if it's a highlight reel, if it's an email, if it's, like you said, setting someone up, talking from experiences from different coaches like yourself, Matt, and Vince, that have been very in tune with, how to get players over to the States and onto that next level. I think just having those relationships and knowing, it's who you know, but also, in terms of allowing them, that support system is really important.
Huge part of it these days. Hey, it's a really, not just about where they are now, but where they're going.
Yep. Sure.
Julio asks, do you do your own subs or do you have someone do it for you? And if I could just maybe build on that question, the role of the assistant. If they don't do your subs, then what do you value? What is their role? Could you kind of just flesh that out?
Yeah. And this probably should be our last one, just because we're probably going to get kicked out here in about 3 minutes.
Yeah, that's a good one to finish on. I think in terms of my rotation, I have a fair idea of when I want to sub and the rotations that I want to have at certain times. Being specific in terms of roles and when to sub when is important. I think having a time, but not. This is what I don't know. This is just something that I reflect on as a coach. I'm watching NBA, and they're very, very detailed and specific, and that's obviously the highest level. But for example, there'll be a player that comes out at a certain time every single game, and I don't know. I don't have the same, I guess, approach as that, because there might be different things that happen in the course of that game. For example, there might be a shot clock that goes off, or there might be a stoppage in game. There might be a spillage on the court. Like, that's more time to rest versus a situation where it's back and forth. Referees aren't calling any fouls. Well, that's more of a high paced game. So that means that probably we're going to need a sub a little bit earlier. So I try and kind of keep that in mind and just kind of read body language, like I said, going back to those connections with the players and having trust in them to say, hey, you need to tell me when you need a sub, but more importantly, I need to see that from them. From the assistant's point of view, definitely listening to them if they have, like an idea of, who we should get in for rotation, or if they see something, definitely always listening to that. But they're probably not in charge of the subs. I always try and take control of that, because I feel like I need to be the one that's making those decisions in those moments. But definitely, like, Sonny was a great coach for me in the Husky season. He was always just firing things at me, and it's up to me as a coach to kind of process that. If a lot of the times, if I'm thinking the same thing that he's thinking, then that's a good sign for us to make that call or make that change. So yeah, it's very subjective. It's very different between games. I think having a plan is important, but also being flexible is equally important.
Great. Thanks, Aaron. I think we might get kicked out here, but awesome content. Really, really, really insightful. So appreciative of the time that you've given us today. I know we could probably keep talking with you for another hour or 2 hours, and maybe we need to do another one. I don't know, because lots of really great stuff here. So many thanks to everyone who joined today, and all the great questions and all the great insights. So thanks, awesome, Aaron, and thanks everyone for joining.
Awesome. Appreciate it, guys. That's great.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Happy to take any feedback that anyone has on, the construction of these, and if you've got any suggestions for future topics, or any questions related to Aaron that you want to follow up with him on, please send those through. We will be posting the link, a video of this session, which has been recorded on our Harbour YouTube page. So many thanks again for everyone joining and being a part of this conversation. Cool.
Sure.
Great.
Thank you, guys.